In this congregation, you have two options offered to you every Sunday for a spiritual practice. One is, as we sing the children out, you can take that home and say anytime, when I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. The other spiritual practice that you may take home with you is this Buddhist meditation, a loving kindness meditation. We say this together. I say the first line and you say it after me if you choose to. We say it 3 times, and the first time we say it for ourselves. May I be free from danger. May I be mentally happy. May I be physically happy. May I have ease of well-being. The second time we say it for somebody we love. May you be free from danger. May you be mentally happy. May you be physically happy. May you have ease of well-being. And the third time, as a spiritual challenge, we say it for somebody against whom we have a resentment. May you be free from danger. May you be mentally happy. May you be physically happy. May you have ease of well-being. I don't know if your family tells stories, but mine does. My mother used to drive us around the South. She would say, "I'm showing you your godly heritage." And mostly we'd be tramping through old graveyards that were kind of overgrown, and we'd come home with chiggers. Or we would be looking at old Associate Reformed Presbyterian churches, or the little brick houses that they used to stay in when she and her parents and her brothers and sisters were home from furlough from their missionary work in Pakistan, where they lived, where my mother grew up. So I'm going to tell you about your godly heritage this morning and talk about one of our forebearers. And by joining this church, you stand in the stream of Unitarian Universalist tradition and heritage, and it is good to tell family stories once in a while. And so this is about a forebearer of ours named Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian minister. He was outspoken. He was not sweet. He was not diplomatic. He let his judgments fly in conversation rather than trying to be understanding. He was not tolerant, because tolerance can be overdone. He was not tolerant of stupidity or wickedness, in his view. And so I find myself wondering whether he would have been fun to have dinner with. But he is fun to read about. He was born in 1810 on a farm with a rocky, thin soil in Massachusetts. He was the youngest of 11 children. 5 generations of his family had been farmers on that soil. His grandfather, John Parker, had fought in the French and Indian War, and then 15 years later, he had led the militia against the Redcoats at Lexington, saying, "If they mean to have a war, let it begin here." None of his sisters and brothers was bookish. But his father started reading novels and fell in love with novels and needed somebody to discuss them with. And so Theodore was the bookish one. He loved to read and he loved to study. His mother, Theodore Parker's mother, loved the old ballads. And when the farm work was done, she would sing to the family in the kitchen. She would sing them to sleep at night. She would tell family stories and read to the family from the Bible. So I said Theodore was a reader, but he was a reader. By the time he was 9, he was reading Milton, learning Greek, digesting philosophy. He writes that he wrecked his health by studying 16 hours a day. By the time he was an adult, he had a library of 14,000 books. And his friends would tell you that he could say what was in each one of them. He only lived to the age of 50. At 47, he wrote, "My mother would say I'm 47, but inside I feel the digits are reversed." By the time Theodore was a teenager, he was teaching at a local school. When he got a chance to go to Harvard, he jumped at it and then went to Harvard Divinity School. Now, Harvard was a Unitarian school, and so he got the best in training in Unitarian ministry and theology. His first parish in West Roxbury, Massachusetts was a delightful experience for him. He married his wife, Lydia. They did not have any children, but he had toys in his minister's study at the church, and all the children were invited to come play with them, and all the children in the church called him Parky. Like most intellectuals of his day, Parker drew from the scholarship coming out of Germany and read Kant, Schleiermacher, Hegel, Schelling, and all of those men were applying reason to the texts of the Bible, reading them in their original languages, dissecting vocabulary use, writing style, hints as to the time of the writing of those texts. And so biblical scholarship, critical thinking applied to the Bible scriptures, was letting people discover that it was a book written by many different voices, many different authors, sometimes with competing political views, with competing theological views, sometimes with history that matched the history that was not in the not in the scriptures, and sometimes with history that was very different from the history that was not in the scriptures. Parker's friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson, another one of our forebears, preached a sermon at Harvard to the graduating class of the Harvard Divinity School. It was a firecracker of a sermon. He talked about how people believing in Jesus because of miracles was monstrous. He said, why would God, having laid out natural law, break the natural law just in order to make people believe in Jesus? He said that was crazy. God intervened in the mind, in the spirit, but not in the physical world. God speaks directly to your mind and your heart, not through scriptures, but to our souls. God wasn't some alien presence in our mind either. The God force was part of our mind, part of consciousness, something we were born with. I think this would sound shocking, even to people in most churches in this era, much less in the early 1800s. The other part of the sermon was that he said this was God's frozen people, that they didn't have any heart, that they were all intellect, that they were boring. I think I remember reading that he pointed out the window to a church that was down the road from the chapel where he was preaching and said, in that church, the minister is dull as ditch water. He was asked by Harvard not to come back. But he didn't want to come back. They were like, you're fired. He was like, I quit. Parker was friends with Emerson and with a whole group of people that you heard about in the children's time. I hope you heard that story, because those are all our forebears. Those are your family as Unitarians. So Louise May Alcott, her dad, Bronson Alcott, was a pioneer in educational philosophy, vegetarian, liked to think about going back to nature, but whenever he did, it was too hard, so he came home. Thoreau was just like he was in the book. He was in love with the animals, The animals were in love with him. He could name every plant. He could name every animal. He knew when the foxes were having their babies and where. I know they're called kits, but I'm just saying babies so I don't sound pretentious. The children loved Thoreau, and all the adults thought Thoreau was probably about 11 years old inside. He was pressured by Emerson's wife, Lydian, to take a bath once in a while and wash his clothes. And everybody thinks that he was in love with her, so he did it for her. That group of friends was always having conversations. They were called the Transcendentalists, and Theodore Parker was friends with the Transcendentalists. Here is what the Transcendentalists taught. Let me see if you think that they were right. They said, religion is innate in every human. Everyone is born with the capacity to hear and feel God, to know what is right. Humans have an intuitive grasp of morality. Christianity is just one religion among many that point to truth. Jesus, while being a revelation of God, was not perfect and was not the only revelation. God could raise up more Christs at any time and probably had, and in fact, in the future, he might raise up a greater one. The American Unitarian Association and the Unitarian ministers in Boston were horrified at this teaching. Atheists, blasphemers. They took Theodore Parker, who they were kind of scared of because Theodore Parker had taken apart a rebuttal of Emerson's famous last sermon in the Harvard Divinity School. One of the professors had written a rebuttal. Oh, this is total ridiculous nonsense, and here's why. And I can't do a Boston accent. That's as close as I can get. Parker published a rebuttal to the rebuttal where he took apart the professor's logic, pointed out its flaws, and pointed out his mistakes in the translation from the German. So the American Unitarian Association, because Parker was preaching in a church this transcendentalist philosophy, religion, they decided to excommunicate him. He came to the meeting where they were deciding to excommunicate him, and the more they talked with him, the fewer and fewer of them wanted to really push shoving him out. Because he said, listen, you don't think I'm Orthodox Unitarian. Tell me, please, what is, it was like that moment in the debate. Please proceed. Tell me what is Orthodox Unitarianism. Well, they couldn't tell him because you know what? Unitarianism doesn't have a creed. We know what most Unitarian Universalists believe. We know what we agree to affirm and promote, and that's only since 1961. Before that, no creed, no sense of how to measure orthodoxy. He was like, well, you either make a creed and throw me out, or you let me stay. And they never followed up on anything. He kept preaching. He would preach like a firecracker, as I said. He and his friend Emerson, they both would just say it. And Parker, they had to rent a theater in downtown Boston because 3,000 people would come to hear him preach. There wasn't a church that could fit everybody. And so he would just lambaste the bankers for charging too much interest, and he would call by name the mill owners who weren't paying their workers enough. And he talked about women's suffrage, and he talked about abolition of slavery. And he was a mover and a shaker. One of his sermons is still studied today in Unitarian Universalist seminaries. It's called The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. You can still Google it and get it if you want to. The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. And what he said in there was, the only thing that is permanent in Christianity is the justice and love preached by Jesus. Everything else comes and goes. The thing that you're burned at the stake for, one century, you are lauded for. The next century, the thing that horrifies people one year they'll be very blasé about the next year. I remember my Aunt Dorothy talking to me about, she's in her 80s now, another firecracker. She went to church in Germany, because that's where they lived at the time, and she said, you know, the Lutherans here, they are so strict about wearing jewelry and makeup. And yet the youth group would go out for beers. We would drink beer because God gave us beer, Martin Luther said, you know, but no jewelry. And she said, and then when we moved back to the United States, it was like beer was horrible, but you could dress like a tart. Theodore Parker would have said, yep, exactly. All practices, all membership rituals, all forms of worship, all denominations, popes, creeds, architecture, whether people clap in worship or not. He didn't say that, I'm saying that. What kind of music was played? Whether the rug is this color or that color, whether there's slate. I've known churches to almost split up, not Unitarian churches, of course, but over whether the carpet comes up. How far does the carpet come up and when does the slate begin? All of that is temporary, transient, he said, and people attach to all the wrong things. And what they should attach to is love and justice. Nothing else matters. So these 3,000 people would come to hear him preach. He said the state was responsible for public education of all its citizens. That was a new idea at the time. Mostly, though, he is known for his anti-slavery work. It is my sorrow, and maybe to your surprise, it is my sorrow to tell you that the American Unitarian Association did not support him in this work. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, supported by Unitarian Senator Daniel Webster, and signed into law by Unitarian President Millard Fillmore. It was first enforced by Unitarian judges. And what the Fugitive Slave Act said was that any black man or woman in the North could be sent back south, or sent south for the first time, by the word of any white person who said that person used to be enslaved. It went before a judge, not a jury, but a judge. Now, the judge could decide to send that person back down south, or to send that person down south for the first time on the word of this white person, maybe who owed the person money. I don't know. There are lots of reasons for wanting somebody shipped off. So you go before a judge, and if the judge says, yep, you're going south, the judge is paid $10. If the judge said, no, you're a free person, I don't believe the word of that white person, you're staying here, the judge got paid $5. It is a horror. Any Northerner who aided or abetted a fugitive, enslaved man or woman, could be fined in 1850 dollars now, could be fined $1,000. $1,000 for aiding and abetting. The president of the American Unitarian Association at that time said, "It is our duty under the Constitution to return the fugitives. I would return my own wife and mother to slavery in order to save the Union." And Parker preached from his pulpit to a lot of people and said, you notice he didn't say he would return himself to slavery. Parker declared from the pulpit, quote, "I will say this solemnly, I will shelter and I will help the fugitive with all my humble means and power. I will act with any body of serious and decent people as the head or the foot or the hand in any mode not involving the use of deadly weapons to defeat the operation of this law." End quote. His church had some members who were fugitive, formerly enslaved men and women. Parker organized a vigilance committee to protect the 300 formerly enslaved men and women in Boston. And when the slave hunters, because you could make a living being a slave hunter, when they came after members of his congregation, William and Ellen Craft, he hid Mr. and Mrs. Craft in his cellar and wrote his sermons with a pistol on his desk, cocked and ready to fire. I think he sounds like a Texan. Until they could be taken to Canada. He led an attack on the courthouse where a captured slave was being held there, and that landed him in jail for a time. And he summed up his defense by saying, quote, "The spirit of liberty, the love of justice was early fanned into flame in my boyish heart. Such a monument covers the bones of my own kinfolk. It was their blood which reddened the long green grass at Lexington. It is my own name which stands chiseled on that stone, and the tall captain who marshaled his fellow farmers and mechanics into stern array was my father's father. I learned to read out of his Bible, and with a musket he that day captured from the foe, I learned another religious lesson, that rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." Yeah. We need more scholars and believers like Theodore Parker around today. I have my own ideas, of course, about what he would be preaching about. I think he would preach against the credit card companies that send credit cards to college students and middle class and lower class people, people who don't have enough money, and then charge them exorbitant interest and then move their due date around so that they're always late on their payments and they end up drowning in debt. I think he would preach that, I hope he would preach about the total inclusion of gays and lesbians into our society, not separate but equal civil union to marriage, but actual equal rights for all gays and lesbians. I know he would fight against the death penalty because he did in his own day, and I hope that he would stand by many of the other things that I believe in. Some things I don't know what to believe in. I would look forward to hearing what he said about the decriminalization of drugs, about the drone program, about redistricting, about background checks for gun ownership. I'm going to keep that man in mind, and I would like for you to keep him in mind as well so that he can strengthen and inspire you to be brave and clear. I have to say, he did align himself somewhat, as many of us do, with the ideas on the fringe. He was interested in hypnotism and health food, utopian communities, going back to nature. He was passionate, and he stood for what he believed was right. Not only stood for it, but put himself on the line for it. There's a stained glass window in a church in Boston showing Theodore Parker at his writing desk with his notes and with his pistol. No one remembers what the president of the American Unitarian Association looked like. There are no stained glass windows with his picture. So let us be inspired. We are so often fighting to be even-tempered. We are so sensible, so cautious, so fearful of looking foolish that sometimes we forget to speak out against what is wrong. So I say go forth in peace and passion with love. Make some mistakes. Speak your truth with love and back it up with reason and with action. And may Saint Theodore look down upon you and guide you and help you. And me too.